The city lights of Manhattan glittered below, a sprawling galaxy of cold, distant stars seen through the floor-to-ceiling glass of Julian Vance's penthouse. The space was a monument to wealth and isolation, a triplex where minimalist designer furniture sat on polished marble floors like sculptures in an empty museum. There were no photographs on the walls, no personal trinkets on the shelves, only contemporary art that was more of an investment than an expression of taste. The silence inside was profound, broken only by the faint, far-off cry of a siren weaving through the streets below. Julian stood before the window, a silhouette against the skyline, holding a tablet that felt heavier than its weight in gold. The room, much like the man himself, was impeccably arranged, breathtakingly opulent, and utterly devoid of warmth or life. A gilded cage built to keep the world out. He was a man who had conquered the world of technology, a billionaire whose name was synonymous with ruthless efficiency. At 45, Julian Vance wore his success like a custom-tailored suit, perfectly fitted and masking the man underneath. A life of failed relationships, of women who had seen his bank account before they ever saw him, had carved deep lines of cynicism around his eyes. He had become a master at predicting human greed, so much so that he decided to prove his bitter worldview with a cruel, private experiment. He had given 3 women a key to his kingdom, a black card with no limit, and waited for them to reveal their true nature. In his hand, he held the results, the cold, hard data he believed would reaffirm the one truth he trusted, that everyone had a price. His thumb swiped across the screen, revealing the first statement. Laura, the sharp-witted lawyer, had not disappointed. Her charges read like a luxury catalogue. A diamond necklace from Tiffany, a shopping spree on Fifth Avenue that could fund a small business, and a down payment on a new sports car. Julian felt a familiar, hollow satisfaction. He had been right. Next came Victoria, the aggressive marketing executive. Her spending was even more audacious, a testament to her ambition: first-class flights to Europe, a week at an exclusive Swiss spa, and a series of purchases at designer boutiques that screamed for attention. He took a slow sip of his scotch, the ice clinking softly against the glass. This was the world he knew, a predictable landscape of transactional relationships and insatiable desire. The evidence was irrefutable, validating the walls he had built so carefully around his heart. Then he came to the final statement, the one he had included almost as an afterthought: Elena Morales, his housekeeper. The quiet, almost invisible young woman who moved through his home with a gentle efficiency. He expected to see a modest sum, perhaps a new coat for the winter or a gift for her family, something practical that would still fit neatly into his cynical narrative. But the screen showed something else entirely. Something that made the gears of his mind grind to a halt. There was only one transaction, a single, staggering charge for $650,000. His eyes narrowed, trying to make sense of the words next to the amount. The recipient was not a luxury brand or a travel agency. It was the finance department of the New York Medical Center, specifically designated for the pediatric cardiology wing. The tablet slipped slightly in his hand as a feeling he hadn't experienced in years washed over him. Utter, unadulterated shock. For a moment, Julian's world tilted on its axis. The numbers on the screen were a language he understood better than any other. But this was an anomaly, a variable he had never considered. His mind, a fortress built on cynical certainties, scrambled for a logical explanation. It had to be a scam, a sophisticated one, far more clever than the blatant greed of the other 2 women. He imagined a network of accomplices, a carefully crafted sob story designed to prey on the guilt of the ultra-rich. He decided he would confront her, not with the cold, dismissive anger he reserved for business failures, but with the precision of a surgeon dissecting a lie. He found her in the cavernous kitchen, her back to him, humming softly as she polished a set of silver spoons. She moved with a quiet grace, a ghost in his gilded machine, completely unaware that her world was about to be turned upside down. He walked toward her, the sound of his leather shoes echoing on the marble floor. "Elena," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. She turned, a small, startled smile on her face that quickly vanished when she saw the expression on his. He held out the tablet, the screen glowing with the damning transaction. "I need you to explain this." The color drained from her face, leaving her skin ashen. The polishing cloth slipped from her fingers, landing silently on the floor. Her eyes, wide with a terror so profound it was almost paralyzing, darted from the screen to his face and back again. She didn't look like a master manipulator caught in the act. She looked like a frightened child, about to be punished for a crime she didn't understand. Her hands trembled, her lips parted, but no words came out. In that moment, all she could see was the end of everything. Finally, her voice emerged, a fractured whisper thick with tears. "It wasn't for me, Mr. Vance, I swear." Her hands, shaking uncontrollably, fumbled for the worn smartphone in her apron pocket. She swiped through her photos, her thumb smudging the screen until she found the one she was looking for. She held it out to him. It was a picture of a small boy, perhaps 10 years old, with dark, intelligent eyes and a smile that seemed too big for his frail body. "This is my brother, Leo," she explained, her words tumbling out in a rush of desperate honesty. She told him about the rare congenital heart defect, the prognosis that grew worse with each passing week, and the one surgeon in the country who could perform the life-saving operation, a procedure with a price tag that was more like a ransom. She described the crushing weight of their reality, a world of endless hospital visits, mounting medical bills, and the quiet, creeping dread that followed their family like a shadow. They had tried everything from bake sales in their local church to online fundraising campaigns that barely garnered a few $100s. Each new day brought Leo closer to a point of no return. When Julian had handed her that black card, she said it felt like an impossible prayer being answered. She never saw it as a gift to be spent on herself. She saw it as a lifeline for her brother. With tears streaming down her face, she swore she would work for him for free for the rest of her life, that she would sign any contract, do anything to repay the debt she believed she now owed him. Her confession wasn't an excuse. It was the raw, unfiltered cry of a heart pushed to its absolute limit. Listening to her, Julian felt the foundations of his world begin to shift. The narrative he had so carefully constructed, one of universal greed and transactional relationships, was being dismantled by the pure, unselfish love of this young woman. He looked at the photo of the smiling boy, then back at Elena, whose face was a mask of terror and devotion. The cynical billionaire, the master of a cold, digital empire, saw an emotion he had long dismissed as a weakness, a love so powerful it would risk everything for another's survival. It was a currency he had never been able to acquire, a wealth he had never known. For years, he had been searching for proof of humanity's corruption, and in one shocking moment, he had found undeniable evidence of its grace. And honestly, stories like this, they're the reason we keep going. And if you feel the same, subscribing to our channel helps us bring more of them to light. A memory, long buried and sealed away, surfaced in his mind with the force of a physical blow. He was a boy again, standing in a bleak hospital hallway, the sterile smell burning his nostrils. He remembered his own sister, Sarah, her laughter fading over weeks until it was just a whisper. His parents, good, hard-working people, were broken not just by grief, but by the helplessness of their poverty. They couldn't afford the specialist, the experimental treatment that might have saved her. He had built his entire life on the promise that he would never be that helpless again, that money would be his shield and his sword, but in his relentless pursuit of power, he had forgotten the very reason he started. Elena's desperation wasn't a stranger's plea, it was an echo of his own past. He looked at Elena, and for the first time, He didn't see an employee or a variable in an experiment. He saw a person, terrified and brave, fighting the same battle he had lost so many years ago. The hard lines around his eyes softened, the icy calm in his voice melting away to reveal something she had never heard before. Empathy. "You don't owe me anything," he said, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. He paused, making a decision that defied every cynical rule he had ever lived by. "The debt is cleared. Now get your coat. We're going to go see your brother." In that instant, the experiment was over. He was no longer a detached observer judging humanity. He was stepping into it, drawn by a force he had long since stopped believing in. The pediatric cardiology wing of the New York Medical Center was another universe entirely. It was a world away from the silent, sterile opulence of his penthouse, a place of bright, cartoon-painted walls that couldn't quite mask the underlying scent of antiseptic and fear. The air hummed with the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the quiet, anxious murmurs of parents. Julian, a man who commanded boardrooms with an iron will, felt utterly out of place. He followed Elena to Leo's room and saw the boy from the photograph, looking even smaller and more fragile in the oversized hospital bed. But when Leo saw his sister, his face lit up with a joy so pure and powerful it seemed to fill the entire room. Julian watched as Elena took her brother's hand, their bond a tangible thing, a quiet testament to a love that needed no words. But as Julian stepped out of his isolated world and into Elena's, ripples began to spread through his own. The news of his sudden, intense involvement with his housekeeper's family traveled quickly through the rarefied air of Manhattan's elite. At a sleek gallery opening, he overheard the whispers. Laura and Victoria, their pride wounded, had been busy painting a picture of him as a fool, a lonely old man being taken for a ride by a cunning young woman. "It's a textbook case," he heard a rival CEO say with a smirk. "The oldest story in the book. She found his weakness and is exploiting it for all it's worth." Each whispered comment was a small, sharp jab at his newfound conviction, a reminder of the world he knew, a world that had no room for selfless acts. The relentless gossip from his social circle began to seep into his own mind, reawakening the cynical beast he had tried to quiet. Doubts gnawed at him during the long, silent nights in his empty penthouse. Was he being naive? Was this all just a more elaborate, more patient form of the same greed he had seen in Laura and Victoria? He found himself watching Elena, searching for a flicker of deceit in her eyes, a hint of calculation in her gentle words. But he found nothing. She remained steadfastly genuine, her gratitude quiet and profound, her focus entirely on Leo's health. Her unwavering sincerity was a constant, gentle rebuke to his own ingrained mistrust, forcing him to confront the painful truth that his cynicism might be a bigger prison than his wealth. One evening, days before the scheduled surgery, he found Elena in his library, staring out at the city lights. She looked small and overwhelmed. On impulse, he walked over and simply stood beside her. After a long silence, he asked her what she dreamed of before all of this. Her answer was simple and immediate. She had always wanted to be a pediatric nurse, to spend her life helping children like Leo. In a moment of uncharacteristic vulnerability, Julian found himself telling her about Sarah, a story he hadn't shared with anyone in over 20 years. In the shared quiet of that room, high above the bustling city, they were no longer a billionaire and his housekeeper. They were just two people connected by a shared history of loss and a fragile, burgeoning hope for the future. You know, it's moments like these that really show what people are made of. And if you'd like to support us in telling more stories about the strength of the human spirit, please consider subscribing. The morning of Leo's surgery arrived, cloaked in a cold grey dawn. The air was thick with a tension that felt electric. Julian found himself in the surgical waiting room, a place he had no business being, sitting on an uncomfortable vinyl chair next to Elena and her mother. He had cancelled 3 multi-million-dollar meetings to be there, an act that would have been unthinkable to him just weeks ago. The hours crawled by, each tick of the clock on the wall a deafening beat marking the slow passage of time. He watched Elena, who sat perfectly still, her hands clasped in prayer, her face a pale mask of hope and fear. He realized then that his presence there wasn't an act of charity. It was a necessity. His own chance at healing, at finding some meaning in his sterile existence, was now inextricably linked to the fate of the small boy fighting for his life just a few doors down the hall. The grand ballroom of Julian's corporate headquarters was a sea of glittering diamonds and tailored tuxedos, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of self-important chatter. Laura and Victoria moved through the crowd like sharks, their smiles sharp and predatory, confident that this charity gala was a prelude to their own professional ascension. They believed Julian had finally come to his senses, ready to announce a lucrative partnership with one of them. In the periphery, almost invisible, Elena moved with quiet efficiency, refilling champagne flutes and clearing canapes, her server's uniform a stark contrast to the couture gowns surrounding her. She felt a world away from these people, her thoughts still lingering in the quiet, hopeful atmosphere of the hospital waiting room, completely unaware that the axis of her life was about to shift once more. This time, in the full glare of the city's most powerful figures. When Julian stepped onto the stage, a hush fell over the room. He didn't look like the ruthless titan of industry they all knew. There was a new light in his eyes, a calm that replaced the usual guarded cynicism. He tapped the microphone, the sound echoing slightly, and began to speak, his voice steady and clear. "Good evening. We're here tonight to talk about investment, about value. For most of my life, I measured value in stock prices, in market shares, in acquisitions. I built an empire on the belief that everything and everyone has a price tag." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, his gaze sweeping over the expectant faces. "I recently conducted a small, private experiment to prove that theory, and tonight I'd like to share the results with you, because I was proven profoundly and wonderfully wrong." Behind him, a massive screen flickered to life. It displayed, without names, 2 credit card statements. The room filled with confused murmurs as the itemized lists scrolled by: a $50,000 watch, a series of designer handbags, a down payment on a luxury car. Julian didn't need to name names. The blood draining from Laura's and Victoria's faces told the story for him. They stood, frozen, their smug expressions melting into masks of pure horror as their private greed was laid bare for their entire social and professional world to see. "This," Julian said, his voice devoid of malice, simply stating a fact, "is what the world tells us is valuable. This is the pursuit of status, of temporary pleasure. It is an investment in nothing." The silence in the ballroom was now absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket of public humiliation. Then the screen changed. It now showed a single transaction, $650,000, paid to the New York Medical Center's pediatric cardiology wing. It was followed by a photograph that filled the entire screen, a picture of Leo, taken just a day ago, his cheeks full, his eyes bright, and a scar on his chest that was a testament to his victory. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Julian's voice, now thick with an emotion no one had ever heard from him, cut through the silence. "And this is an investment in a human life." He scanned the crowd, his eyes finding the one person who wasn't looking at him. "Elena Morales, would you please join me on stage?" Every head turned to follow his gaze, watching in stunned disbelief as he beckoned the young woman in the server's uniform. Elena walked toward the stage as if in a dream, her heart pounding against her ribs. She stood beside him, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlights, terrified and confused. Julian turned to face her, his expression one of profound respect. For years, my money bought me silence, luxury, and an empty home. Today, thanks to Eleanor, it bought a life, and in doing so, it gave me back my own. He then faced the audience again, his voice ringing with newfound purpose. Tonight, I am announcing the formation of the New Heart Foundation, dedicated to funding life-saving medical procedures for children whose families cannot afford them. Its first endowment will be $100 million. He turned back to a stunned Elena. And I can think of no one with more integrity, compassion, or understanding of true value to lead it as its executive director. You taught me what a real investment looks like. Elena, please help me continue making them. The ballroom remained frozen in a state of suspended shock. The silence so complete it felt louder than the preceding applause. Laura and Victoria, stripped bare of their pretense, simply vanished into the crowd, their retreat a quiet, undignified shuffle that marked the end of their social reign. They were not defeated by an attack, but by the simple, irrefutable weight of their own choices laid bare for all to see. Elena, standing in the bright, unforgiving glare of the spotlights, felt a wave of dizziness. She looked at Julian, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears, and gave a single, solemn nod. It wasn't a gesture of victory, but of profound, overwhelming gratitude. As the room finally erupted into genuine, heartfelt applause, Julian looked at her and felt the last of his cynical armor crumble away. He had spent a lifetime making calculated investments, but in this one act of faith, he had finally found a return that was truly priceless. 2 years later, the sterile, minimalist aesthetic of Julian Vance's world had been replaced by something far more vibrant. The offices of the New Heart Foundation were a testament to its mission, filled with photographs of smiling children, heartfelt thank you cards from grateful parents, and an atmosphere of collaborative energy. Elena, as its executive director, led with a quiet authority that inspired deep loyalty and respect. She was the same person, yet utterly transformed. Her innate compassion, now a powerful tool for change. She managed a multi-million-dollar budget with the same care she once used to polish silver, ensuring every dollar served its purpose. Julian was rarely seen in his old corporate headquarters. Instead, he spent his days at the foundation, working alongside Elena, his former ruthlessness replaced by a patient, gentle focus. He had discovered that the true measure of his wealth wasn't in what it could buy him, but in what it could do for others. The dedication ceremony for the Leo Morales Pediatric Cardiac Wing marked the culmination of their shared journey. It was a sun-drenched afternoon, and the new facility was filled with the sounds of laughter and hope. A healthy, energetic Leo, now a lanky teenager who dreamed of becoming an architect, stood proudly beside his sister as she addressed the crowd. She spoke not of financial achievements, but of the human heart, its fragility and its incredible resilience. She told her own story, not as a tale of hardship, but as proof that compassion was the world's most powerful currency. Julian watched from the side, a quiet observer, his face relaxed in a genuine smile that reached his eyes. He saw the faces of the families the foundation had helped, saw the doctors whose work was now fully funded, and understood that he had not just built a charity. He had built a community, a legacy of healing. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city, Julian found himself walking through Central Park with Elena and Leo. The boy was animatedly describing his ideas for a more patient-friendly hospital design, his voice full of the boundless optimism of youth. Julian listened, feeling a sense of peace he had never known in his penthouse overlooking this very park. He had started a cynical experiment to confirm his darkest beliefs about humanity, only to have his world turned upside down by a single act of selfless love. He had lost his isolation, but had gained a family, one forged not by blood, but by a shared purpose and a profound, quiet respect. It's stories like theirs that truly show the enduring strength of the human spirit. And if you've been moved by their journey, subscribing to our channel helps us continue to share these powerful reminders of hope.